Hello, I'm Hannah, and this is Hannah's Books. I come to you today with a book tag in celebration of what one of my brilliant commenters calls my Tag-stravanganza, where I plan to post several tag videos this week, and maybe a different kind of video too. Today, I want to answer the shelf respect tag, created by Richard at History Lit. It's a great tag, and I apologize for my long delay before getting to its very interesting questions. So let's get straight to them now. Question 1. How do you organize your books on the shelves? Organize might be a bit of an overstatement, at least in actual practice. There are a few too many piles of books in corners and on desks and on assorted tables. But at least in theory, I split my books up by country of origin of the author, then arrange them by author, shelved in very rough chronological order, more or less. And then when I know off the cuff, without looking it up, I put the individual author's works in basic order of publication, but I'm not rigorous about it. In some sections of my personal shelves, I've interspersed novels with biographies of the authors of those novels, or other nonfiction studies of those novels or authors. That is true for canonical American fiction, for example. But then there are other places where I keep all literary biographies separate from the novels, like for Victorian Britain. Perhaps someday I'll work towards consistency, but probably not. My library is not so enormous that I can't figure out where a book is in just a couple of tries, and usually I know exactly where the book is on the first time. And fairly recently, because of some new acquisitions, I squeezed a bookcase in a corner of my living room solely to hold books about some of my most read American authors. Note that I don't actually shelve their fiction here. Primarily, the bookcase holds biographies and analyses of Emily Dickinson, Eudora Welty, Willa Cather, and Sarah Orne Jewett. One shelf of the bookcase had just a wee bit of room left for 3 or 4 books, so I added my few books about Margaret Fuller, a great biography, a relatively new novelization of her life which I have not yet read, etc. I might add the Library of America edition of her own writing in there too. Now that I think about it, I suspect I will eventually want to shelve those particular books near other books about transcendentalism. But for now, given my very special interest at the moment in Fuller, it makes sense to have them right at hand. Number 2, have you ever merged your collection with your significant other? Not exactly. My spouse David was not a huge reader until fairly late in our relationship. He brought a few books to our marriage, but they all fit on shelves of his bedside table. Once he became a more serious reader, he tended to read the books on my fairly extensive shelves, or sometimes the books on my son's shelves. And when David had new books he wanted to acquire, he either found them at the library, or it was very often because I was interested in them as well. Those books went on the bookcases in what had always been my study. Actually, he did have bookshelves at his office at work. Many of the books were related to his job as a healthcare policy researcher and physician. Many of them were not books he read for pleasure, but he did have a whole shelf of classic poetry, from John Keats to T.S. Eliot to Rumi and Robert Burns and even Emily Dickinson. When David died, one of his beloved co-workers brought those books to me, and I still keep them separate and all together instead of blending them in with my own poetry books. Question 3, do you write your name and or the price paid in your books? I never put the price paid in my books, but for a while I did sometimes put my phone number and name. When I was in history graduate school, my classmates and I often shared books as we were studying for comprehensive exams, and it was very useful to have owners' names and contact information right there. The other time I wrote my name in books is when my son was young. I was an obsessive reader about parenting. Not necessarily advice books per se, although I had plenty of those from a wide range of perspectives, but many more that were more theoretical works, books explaining child development, memoirs, etc. Those books eventually became the core of an organization's lending library, of which I served as librarian for many years. So having my name and contact info in some of those books, again, became relatively relevant. The fourth question, do you keep all of the books you've read or only the most cherished? I have a lot of books on my shelves, but really I only keep books I think I might read again. If I truly cherish a book, but know I would never read it again, I'm not certain if I would keep it. Then again, I assume I would want to reread anything I cherished. Incidentally, many of the books I know I might reread, or at least poke around in again, are not cherished books, but instead have information that I might want to revisit for some reason. Those are usually works of nonfiction, often academic history. Number 5, does the style and quality of your bookshelves and/or cases matter? I was about to say no, but I do admit that I can't stand those fake wood shelves that IKEA and places like that used to sell. Cheap pine shelves are just fine for me, as are metal racks for that matter. One of my, quote, shelves is the wooden surround for the radiator in the living room. Question 6. Do you have any gripes or complaints about bookcase construction? I'm not picky about construction, but am irked sometimes if the height of the shelves is radically different from the basic heights of books. And that actually leads into the next question. Number 7, do you ever stack books horizontally? Yes, I do. Sometimes I just slip in an extra book wherever it will fit on top of books stacked vertically. On a bookcase shelf that has a lot of horizontal space, I'll organize a whole stack of books exclusively horizontally, or sometimes several books horizontally on top of several books arranged vertically. I'm pretty comfortable with that first one of a horizontal stack of books if they aren't books I'm likely to want to access extremely regularly. And there really are only a few books like that in my life. Books I want at hand on a daily or weekly basis. Those I want to be easy to pluck off a shelf rather than inserted in some tall stack. The 8th question is a little trickier for me. What are your 5 favorite jackets or covers? I know this sounds weird, but I am remarkably immune to what books look like in general. That's not quite true. I do appreciate looking at beautiful book covers. I just don't feel a need to own those editions. I do have a strange compulsion to have matching sets of books for some of my favorite authors. For example, all of my Jane Austens are penguins, and all of my books by the Bronte sisters are penguins as well. When I was a kid, I had used versions of mass market paperbacks by those authors, and I replaced them at some point with much more lightly used penguins. Now the penguins are falling apart, and I'm thinking about replacing them again with matching covers. I use these books so heavily that I'm thinking about getting hardback sets. Do any of you have suggestions for particular editions? I'd love something sturdy with nice pages and nice print, and possibly with interesting scholarly apparatus from introductions to annotations. And I'm less committed to beautiful covers or something like that. Let me know down in the comments if you have any advice. The next question is kind of similar. What's your most disliked jacket or cover, and why? I'm not keen on movie tie-in covers, but usually I don't really care. Instead of showing you a jacket I dislike, I want to show you one that is totally inappropriate and amuses me to no end, and that I would be happy to put on my shelves. This risque cover of Thomas Hardy's Tess of the D'Urbervilles. Okay, the last substantive question, number 10. Is there such a thing as too many books? Not in the world, definitely not. But yes, There is such a thing as too many books in one's house. At some point, it becomes overwhelming to keep them dusted and organized and read. And honestly, I'm right on the border myself, even after donating a large number of books in the last few months. In fact, as I said, I have many books in stacks in the corner. Many of them are advanced reader's copies that I might review for publication and then discard. But still, books stored on the floor, especially for more than a week or so, not a good thing. And I don't have wall space for any more bookcases either. Okay, that will do it. I'm not going to tag anyone since I'm so late doing this tag, but if you haven't done it already, please consider this to be a personal invitation to do it now. Thank you so much, Richard, for putting these fascinating questions together. And thanks to all of you for joining me today here on Hannah's Books. See you soon.